What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. Sometimes Pokemon get cooked up with special tricks that no other creature could do, and it makes them wholly unique in gameplay and gives them a certain charm. However, sometimes those tricks don't get their copyright renewed, and they become public domain to be used by almost anyone. Perhaps more common in one's signature moves, but signature abilities are no stranger to getting handed out to a wider pool of Pokemon. However, just because an ability is restricted doesn't give it a stamp of quality, resulting in a whole range of great to questionable abilities that used to be held in reserve. So, here are the top 6 best and worst former signature abilities. Number 6 worst, Stench. So first off, Stench is not the worst ability I've ever seen. I mean, it's no slow start after all, but it really doesn't do all that much for the Pokemon that can have it. So predictably, this ability started out as the signature of the Grimer family, as they are notoriously putrid. However, what most people don't remember is that this ability started purely as its out-of-battle effect. These Pokemon smelled so bad that they reduced the likelihood of encountering wild Pokemon. Yes, the horrid fragrance is so pronounced that it permeates even through the Pokeball. But even despite growing to be found on the Stunky line, which does make total sense, the ability wasn't useful until Gen 5 when they gave it the slight buff by possibly flinching the target. So that would be pretty cool, except the Pokemon that can now have Stench are all medium speed to slow, so you're not likely to flinch many things, and your sometimes repel isn't much of a consolation prize, leaving these poison types without much of an ability at all. Number 6 best, No Guard. The best side of the list was actually kind of difficult, with decent choices like Stakeout or Gooey on the table, but I think No Guard can be pretty universally accepted as good. This ability ensures the accuracy of all moves, meaning that no matter what the stats will say, your attack will hit. Every time you use a Focus Blast or a Blizzard, it will act just like an Aerial Ace and hit without fail. This gift was exclusive to the Machop line at first, before getting some hidden ability action in Gen 5, and then seeing others beyond that as well. And of course it was the go-to choice for Mega Pidgeot on top. Now arguably this ability could be a hindrance since it guarantees full accuracy on the whole field, meaning that your enemy will always hit their attacks as well. And this even extends to hitting during the first turns of Fly or Dig when you've left the battlefield. And it is worth noting that in theory this would apply to one-hit KO moves as well, but they have taken great pains to make sure that no Pokemon can have this ability and those attacks at the same time. So it is possible to backfire, but also just selecting any and all moves without fear of missing feels so satisfying. Number 5 worst, Honey Gather. So I mentioned how awful this ability was recently. It was the signature ability of Combee. Yes, just Combee, not even Vespiquen, and all it did was collect the honey item sometimes. Yes, it is much worse than Pickup because instead of anything useful, like a potion or even a protein, you get stuck with only the honey item. This item in Gen 4 was compatible with the honey trees that were far too tedious to bother using, and they could also trigger wild battles, which walking in the grass could do just as well. Honey did trigger Horde battles in Gen 6, but since half of the Pokemon that can even have the Honey Gather ability were introduced in Gen 7, it pretty much negates any slight purpose that they could have had. So aside from the poor Combee that has no other options, be sure to get another ability on the rest of these Pokemon as it's easy enough to make them not useless. Number 5 best, Bulletproof. I deliberated on possibly highlighting Fur Coat or Fluffy for their defensive buffs, but you know what's better than half damage? No damage. Bulletproof provides an immunity to a number of moves with Ball or Bomb or even Cannon origins, meaning that attacks like Bullet Seed, Sludge Bomb, or Octazooka have no effect. Bulletproof was the signature ability of the Chespin line, making good use of their hard outer shells to protect them. But this trait was too good to keep all to themselves, because the Jangmo-o line also got a chance to join the Bomb Squad without fear of harm given their hard plates. And there are even some other more questionable ones for why they even have this ability, but I'm not going to complain about Bulletproof being more common and having more opportunities for use. It may be selective, but the immunities cover 15 different types of attacks, and it even blocks some legendary signature moves. So even if situational, Bulletproof is a solid ability that only keeps getting stronger with more and more moves being added to this protective list every generation. Number 4 worst, Aroma Veil. Honestly, I forget about this ability a lot because it's so underwhelming. I guess it doesn't help that it started as the signature ability of the Spritzee line, which are already disturbing Pokemon, but all this ability does is prevent the limiting of your move selection. So that means the likes of Disable, Encore, or Taunt won't force you into or out of your intended attack. And actually Heal Block also fails, which is nice I suppose, but is it really such an imposition to wait 2 to 5 turns? These stalls usually wear off on their own after a bit, so it's no worse than sitting through a Reflect or a Light Screen, and actually it would have been a lot better to deal with those barriers instead. But with the expansion of the Aroma availability, they seem perfectly content giving Pokemon a tool to solve a problem that already solves itself. At the very least, its counterpart's former signature ability is a bit better for those that it's extended to now. Number 4 best, Shadow Tag. I've had my issues with Wobbuffet over the years because it is so annoying, but its ability Shadow Tag really is something special. Shadow Tag locks down the shadow of your foe, just like the attack Spirit Shackle, and it prevents them from escaping. Granted, there are some limitations, like not being able to trap ghosts, or using a Shed Shell to bypass it, but as perfect as this ability was for Wobbuffet specifically, for requiring the enemy to engage with its retaliation tactics, we saw Shadow Tag expand to the Gothitelle line as a hidden ability, letting it abuse trapped foes with ease, but it also showed up on Mega Gengar, which made it all the more frightening to face. Some Pokemon have to take the time to manually trap their target, so when you can do it just by sitting there and exploit their helpless state, it tips the battle in your favor right from the start. Number 3 worst, Klutz. Another that seems such an obvious bad idea that it makes you wonder why they made it in the first place. It still surprises me that Klutz used to be a signature ability at all, but for some reason the creators had a vendetta against the Baniri evolution line. Klutz isn't so much an ability as a curse since it prevents the Pokemon from using hold items. Literally, the only useful case for this would be if somebody decided to fling a flame orb or something onto you, but that is so convoluted and not likely to ever happen, and instead it just keeps you from regaining health or boosting your attack or any other useful thing that an item might do. And it would have been bad enough to burden one line of Pokemon with this, but they gave it out to, frankly, way too many Pokemon, and even some otherwise great ones like Golurk or Beware. At the very least, it didn't prevent the Mega Stone from activating, so at least Lopunny could get that buff as well, but an ability that suppresses items basically removes both qualities outright, preventing the Pokemon from interacting with multiple crucial parts of the battle and gameplay, making them worse than they could ever imagine. Number 3 best, Huge Power. Absolutely nobody was ever intimidated by facing a Marill in combat, and for good reason, because they're just cute little water rodents, right? Well, not content with being so laid back, Azumarill decided that it would get the Huge Power ability, doubling its attack. Granted, Azumarill wasn't really that strong to start with, but now it's actually a credible threat. And that was even before the added fairy typing. Of course, this ability peaked when being put on a Mega Evolution, with Mega Mawile getting to double its power, when it was already higher than Azumarill's boosted stats, so that's really scary. But even with Megas being gone, we still see it on the Bunnelby line. And it is even technically on some Pokestar Studios opponents as well. Now, since we don't actually have Diggersby in Generation 9, at least not yet anyway, Huge Power is functionally, once again, signature to the Marill line, but it also does the same job as Pure Power, which is for some reason another signature ability, so it's still not really on its own. But nobody can deny that having twice the attacking power would make any Pokemon happy to be able to actually be taken seriously, or to amp up an already powerful monster well beyond reason. Number 2 worst, Plus and Minus. Hoenn gave us quite a lot of pairs, including the oppositely charged Pikachu clones Plusle and Minun, and as adorable as they are, did they really need such awful signature abilities? First of all, these only work in double battles, so you really have to commit, But basically, plus does nothing unless minus is present, and vice versa is true, with them only then being able to buff their special attack. This is so situational that in order to make use of it, you would have to sacrifice so much already just to do the work of a simple charge or other status move. I will grant you that plus and minus have seen some touch-ups over time, with certain attacks now interacting with them, and the fact that they can now get the boost from either plus or minus instead of just the other one, but all of the other Pokemon that were given these abilities have vastly better choices for useful tricks. So why would they want to possibly maybe help in a double battle when they could have much greater control over their own utility in combat? We really ought to have kept these reversed ions on the Pokemon that were meant to have them. Number 2 best, Rough Skin. There are plenty of ways to pressure opposing Pokemon, but making them scared to even touch you is a great way to come out on top. Back in Gen 3, Sharpedo showed off Rough Skin, which meant this shark's exterior was so jagged that it would damage you upon physical contact. That Sceptile is not gonna beat Archie for free, but this extreme lack of exfoliation was not destined to one Pokemon, because Gen 5 saw it expand to Dragons as the hidden ability of the Garchomp line. However, it was not just for sharks, because Druddigon also used its pointed skin to cause pain with every touch. Now, not every physical Pokemon attack actually makes contact, but it's enough to make a difference. So when you can knock out a foe for free, that is pretty powerful. Think of it this way, some Pokemon get to have the Rocky Helmet for free and still get to use another hold item. It's also worth noting that Iron Barbs is in the exact same boat, with the same functionality and being a once signature ability of the Ferroseed line, but being found later on Togedemaru. So these abilities are practically interchangeable for this list, but I just love any time I get the slight satisfaction of residual damage for trying to cause harm to my precious Pokemon. Number 1 worst, Truant. I'm sure that you all saw this one coming. As far as Pokemon abilities go, I don't know that there's any one that's the poster child for being terrible more than Truant, as Slakoth and mostly Slaking have been lambasted for years about how lazy they were with their ability, forcing them to loaf around every other turn. Now, this was done as a gimmick of sorts, but was also a method for controlling Slaking's outrageous stats, being stronger than a legendary. So that is kind of understandable, but when they gave it out to another weaker Pokemon, the entire justification for this ability fell apart. Why do the people in charge hate Durant enough to saddle it with a constant paralysis after every move that it makes? Defenders will say, it's great because you can use entrainment to put Truant on any Pokemon you want. Yeah, well that still leaves Durant with the same awful ability, so now you're both handicapped. Skill Swap would have been a much better option, but no Truant Pokemon is allowed to have that because then they would be unstoppable. So instead they just have to stay stuck with the pause button locking it up every other turn. I suppose we should only be lucky that they haven't forced more Pokemon to have this ability, because just sitting there twiddling your thumbs for half of every battle sounds like the opposite of fun. Number 1 best, Skill Link. When I sat down to make this list, I don't think Skill Link was even on my radar, but this ability is irrefutably remarkable. Honestly, I'm not a huge fan of multi-hit moves because it seems like they never hit enough times, but this ability fixes that. Skill Link doesn't ensure full accuracy, but if you do land a hit, it takes out any variables and guarantees the maximum amount of strikes. Suddenly, normal attacks like Double Slap or Fury Swipes are not only viable, but actually really strong options for the early to mid-game. Not to mention coverage options like Pin Missile, Arm Thrust, Rock Blast, Icicle Spear, and even more. Initially, Skill Link was exclusive to the Shellder line, I guess to take full advantage of the restrictive Spike Cannon attack, but it wasn't long before other Pokemon began to borrow this trick, with many normal types utilizing Skill Link long before you could usually find a Shellder, with the Pikipek line showing it off incredibly well right from the start, and of particular interest is the Minccino line with its signature move Tail Slap creating perfect synergy. And then of course we saw it arrive on Mega Heracross, using its massive arms to hit the full 5 times on its entire moveset if you wanted, causing more damage than other attacks outright. Now, it is a little sad that there are some attacks that could be used with this ability that have never had the chance because none of those Pokemon can learn those attacks. But that just means that we ought to give Skill Link out to even more Pokemon, right? Using an ability to capitalize on what is usually a frustrating and weak-feeling tactic and turning it into a clear advantage means that an ability like Skill Link has got to be considered one of the best by elevating both mediocre Pokémon and attacks at the same time. So, those are the top 6 best and worst former signature abilities. There are so many abilities that could be considered for this list. Maybe you think Download is the greatest, but Filter is a joke, but let your thoughts be known down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded.